Ubisoft used to feel untouchable, not just successful, dominant. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, games that didn't simply release, they arrived. Like an event, like a statement. And that's why it hits so hard when today someone says Ubisoft, and the next word isn't hype, it's delayed, cancelled, restructured. Because Ubisoft isn't just another studio. Ubisoft is one of the companies that shaped modern AAA gaming. Founded in 1986 by the Guillemot brothers, built like a machine, studios everywhere, pipelines designed to ship multiple blockbusters at once. And yet, now there's a phrase hanging in the air that sounds like an alarm. A major reset, a full restart. In January 2026, Ubisoft announced a sweeping restructuring, 5 creative divisions, a radical overhaul, and alongside that, 6 projects cancelled, 7 more delayed. That's not a rough quarter, that's an alarm bell. And here's what makes that alarm so terrifying. It's not just the cancellations, it's what they admit without saying it. When a company as huge as Ubisoft hits the reset button, it means the old system can't be trusted anymore. Because Ubisoft isn't a single studio, it's dozens of teams across continents moving like gears in one machine. And when that machine slips, it doesn't fail quietly. It fails expensively. Years of work become sunk cost. Trailers vanish. Roadmaps get rewritten. And internally, the question stops being what's our next hit and becomes what do we even ship that people will believe in? That's the real nightmare for any publisher. Not delays, but doubt. Because the moment fans and investors start treating your next release like a risk, every announcement feels like a gamble, every showcase feels like a plea, and every sequel feels like it has to save the company. And once you're in that position, one bad launch isn't a disappointment, it's a collapse. And the scary part is, this wasn't one single bad decision, it was a domino effect. Strategy, timing, culture, trust, all collapsing at the same time. So here are 7 main reasons Ubisoft started to decline, and I'm starting with the most obvious one. Reason 1. The Ubisoft formula became a trap. For years, Ubisoft perfected a system, massive open worlds, icons everywhere, checklists everywhere, progress everywhere, a design that worked reliably and sold reliably. But the AAA market has changed. Players are more selective, more impatient, and more unforgiving. When you spend years building huge worlds on a production line, something dangerous happens. You become great at producing, but you lose the instinct for what feels truly unique. And then it happens. You stop competing with your rivals first, and you start competing with the best version of yourself. The formula didn't suddenly break. The world around it changed, and that pressure leads straight into the next problem. Reason 2. Time is the silent killer. Ubisoft lost time, years of it, and you never get those years back. Delays aren't just calendar changes. They burn budgets, they crush morale, they reset marketing, and every extra month is another chance for the internet to decide your game is cursed. Before it even launches, Skull and Bones finally released in 2024 after a long chain of delays. And when a project drags on that long, something happens you can't fully measure. Hype evaporates. Assassin's Creed Shadows was delayed too, officially, for extra polish. But between the lines, it sounds like we can't afford for this to miss. Because when releases take longer, the entire company changes. Rhythm breaks, planning collapses, and suddenly one game carries the weight of multiple games. When time becomes your enemy, you look for another lifeline. And that brings us to the third reason. Reason 3. The live service gamble and live service casualties. Ubisoft wanted the live service jackpot, recurring revenue, seasons, skins, endless engagement, a product that doesn't end, it keeps paying. But live service isn't just a game, it's an operation. Constant content, constant updates, constant balance, constant community pressure all the time. And when a live service project doesn't hit, it's not just unfortunate, it pulls teams down, it pulls studios down, it pulls years down. X-Defiant is one example. Development discontinued, with servers planned to remain online until June 2025. And around that decision, Ubisoft also made real structural changes, including studio closures and reorganizations. That's what a live service miss looks like. Not just a game that underperforms, but a chain reaction. And if live service doesn't create stability, then the big single releases have to carry the company. And that's where things get dangerous. Reason 4. When solid isn't enough anymore. In AAA, solid can be a problem. Because solid doesn't pay for massive budgets. Blockbusters have to be events now. They have to pull players away from everything else. They have to dominate conversation. And if a big release is only okay, the gap between expectations and reality isn't a small dent. It's a cliff. Ubisoft said, in essence, that Star Wars Outlaws had solid ratings, but a softer than expected start. And that phrase is corporate language for, we didn't get what we needed. When you spend big and the numbers don't follow, leadership reaches for the same lever every time: cut, delay, restructure. Which leads into the part that's harder to quantify, but can destroy everything. Reason 5, culture crisis and talent drain. A company can survive bad launches. What's much harder to survive is losing the people who make great games. Ubisoft faced years of serious controversy and criticism around workplace culture. And in France, former executives were later convicted in a case involving workplace harassment. Those headlines aren't just PR damage, they are trust fractures. And trust is the currency that decides whether great people stay or leave. When experienced developers leave, something simple happens, but brutal. Everything slows down, everything gets more expensive, and creative clarity becomes rare. When talent drains, risk rises. When risk rise, costs rise. And when costs rise, you need oxygen. Which brings us to reason 6. Reason 6, the Tencent deal. When a publisher secures a major strategic investment, it's usually about one thing: buying time. Ubisoft created a new structure focused on its most important brands: Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six. And Tencent stepped in with a major investment, 1.116 billion euros. Tencent received roughly a 26% economic interest, while Ubisoft kept control. That isn't automatically good or bad, but it is a signal. You don't do that because everything is perfect. You do it because stability is necessary. Time is valuable, but time only helps if the most important thing comes back in the end: belief. And that brings us to the final reason, the most dangerous one. Reason 7, player trust collapsed, and the benefit of the doubt disappeared. The most dangerous thing Ubisoft lost wasn't money, it was trust. Trust is what drives day one purchases. Trust is what makes bugs forgivable. Trust is what makes a trailer feel like a promise instead of a warning. And Ubisoft had moments that seriously damaged that trust. For example, the intense backlash to NFT and trend experiments. And more broadly, the growing feeling among many players that systems are built first for monetization and engagement, and only second for fun. And when players expect delays, when they feel suspicious before they even play, when they believe a game isn't made for them, but for a system, then excitement dies before the trailer ends. And without excitement, even a good game becomes just another product. So what do you think? Did Ubisoft become too big, too slow, too system-driven? Or is a comeback possible if they ship less, take bigger creative risks, and rebuild trust one release at a time? Do you agree with these 7 reasons? What's missing? What would you remove? Drop your take in the comments. And specifically, which Ubisoft franchise do you miss the most at its absolute peak? You've watched Triumphs and Troubles. You've watched Triumphs and Troubles. Subscribe to the channel for true business stories and comment, which company should we cover next?